why it's there in their question is to really just avoid a pitfall or you going down a rabbit hole of answering the question from a tax point of view when they're trying to it's simplifying your answer a little bit. So really the context is very good to guide your answer and how your whole answer hangs together. But the bottom line, I guess, is that I want to say this is a plan that you could use or a technique, but I want you to have a plan. I want you between now and the exam to have a plan, do what works for you and practice that plan. It's so critical that you practice the plan that works for you, because it's no use going through this in a theoretical point of view. I can present to you today for 2 hours and you can't then go and sit between now and then, do nothing and sit in the exam and hope that this presentation landed. It's really what you use between now and then. So I want you to practice having it. Get a plan and use the techniques, but practice them under exam conditions as well, because you really need to be able to do this under exam stress and time pressure. I've seen some very interesting things that students write under exam pressure, and then when you counsel the students and you show them their exam paper, they can't believe that they wrote something down. And I can only chalk it down to exam stress. And we do weird and wonderful things, such as, you know, being asked to draft a presentation and you write a letter, for example. It's can only think it's time pressure and exam stress that makes us do weird and wonderful things. And I've been there. I've written the exams. I know the stress that you're under. So the more you can practice and get your plan as second nature, the exam should really just feel like another practice exam. That's where you should get to. Then it's more muscle memory, and you're going through the motions, and you're then freeing up your mind to do the higher order thinking that will separate you from the other students. I want you to do that. Okay, great.
So that Jared, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Did I do something? Has everybody still got your screen? Has everybody still seen your screen? Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Did you lose the screen, Penny?
I did. I've got it back. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So sorry
Great.
about.
No worries. So yeah, let's jump into what the actual question was. I don't know if maybe it would just be a good time. How did you find this question from a technical point of view? I don't know if someone wants to maybe just give me some input as to how you found it technically. Is it something that threw you a bit? Does anyone want to?
If I can come in, Jared.
Yes, please.
I think the new tariff sliding scale confused me a bit. Perhaps it was not clearly described, but it confused me a bit, or maybe my interpretation of it. So that is the other technical elements in the question were clear enough. But the new tariff was the one that confused me a bit, particularly when we come to the first 5 kiloliters being free. Does that mean that if I use 20, I'm going to go to a category of 17 to 23, or I'm going to charge each tariff block? You're going to pay for each tariff, and then you add them two together. So you will have to pay for the second and the third, and then the portion that falls under the fourth block.
And so thank you for that, because that was a common problem with this with answering this question, unfortunately. Whether that's students, exactly as you mentioned, students would take the bucket or the category that you fell into, the tariff block that you fell into, as an absolute, rather than moving through the different tariff blocks. I'm hoping that. Sorry, yeah?
Oh, okay. So no, please continue, sir.
No, go for it.
All right. So, no, my question is not related to this question. It's actually related to the previous slide. So I'll let you finish here and then I'll ask.
Okay, great. And then I'll jump back quickly now. But students really found it tricky to interpret that exactly that point. And I guess the sliding scale part was maybe assumed to be understood. And yeah, unfortunately, this is, if you pay an electricity bill nowadays, it's very much works in this way. This paper was drafted in the midst of, for those of you staying in Cape Town, certainly the sort of day zero fears. You know, so this is where this paper came from. It was when we started experiencing a drought, and maybe that was an assumption that the examiners made, that students would understand that the sliding scale. So you can see my cursor, but the following sliding scales, the word sliding scale, told you exactly how it would work. And then further, the tariff system was designed so that households that use less water than average would receive slightly lower bill. And yeah, it was a common problem that how students assumed that if I had, as you said, 20 liters, then I fell completely, all 20 were in here. Whereas actually it's split out, that the first 5 fall in here, the next 6 fall in here, and so on. And that's how you get charged.
I guess I'll be a bad person because I found this to be one of the simplest questions I've come across in a communications exam. I think for me, if anything, the thing that always throws me off, but I think I'm getting better at it. I think any communication form that's not a letter or an email, I always find it so hard to know what the layout should be. So for me, my issue is always, for some reason, I just have a really hard time with presentations, pamphlets, anything that's just not clear, plain, right? Yeah. But otherwise, I just found the scenario really simple to follow. Yeah.
And that was what we hoped as examiners. So it is a simple scenario. So if you understood the sliding scale element, this is an incredibly easy paper. From a technical point of view, it's probably the easiest. You didn't even need a spreadsheet to calculate. Really, it was that simple, I guess. But it still was misunderstood. And yeah, and unfortunately, students didn't do as well as what we had hoped. But you do touch on a good point, is that maybe from a technical point of view, it wasn't that difficult, but actually from a communication element, it was. And that's why I wanted to go through this paper specifically, because you don't often see a pamphlet. And as students, you can rightfully assume, students assume that you're going to receive a letter and a PowerPoint, because, if history tells you that, chances are that's the medium that they will ask you. But assumptions are dangerous, so don't assume that that's what you're going to get. Practice all the different mediums so that you should know. I spoke about that muscle memory. You should know the formats. They should be easy to do. You shouldn't be spending time on thinking about what the format should look like. The structure, yes, your tone, your style, yes, but the actual format. And what I would ask is that you take that sort of eye level view, and as I mentioned, the level-headedness is really always try to take a step back in your exam. It's very difficult to do under exam stress, but if you can take a step back and actually say, is this something that you would receive? This pamphlet, you're supposed to receive it in the post. Each household would receive this. Is this something that you would want to receive? Or have I made it too formal, for example? Or have I made it too complex? And that's what you have to do. You have to put yourself in the shoes of the audience. What are they asking me to do? They're asking me to draft a pamphlet. And what does a pamphlet typically look like? We've all seen pamphlets in one shape or form. And so you'd have to then, think that way and draft it that way. But unfortunately, if you miscalculated, it did put you a little bit on the back foot. It didn't mean that you would fail. So I want to put that out there. The calculation part was a small part of the marks for this paper. You could have quite easily passed if you'd got everything else, and we'll go through that. So there was a question about just the previous slide. I just want to jump back quickly. So
yes, sir. Yes, in terms of the facts, you did mention that I can interpret wherever I can, right? But now what I'm trying to understand is where do you sort of draw the line where you will be borderline recommending? Because my fear is, yes, you're given a certain fact and then you get to elaborate more on it just to sort of make your audience understand. But then when do you sort of where do you sort of draw the line in terms of giving away too much, or where you actually start recommending, whereas the question itself was not to recommend, but was just to make the audience understand? So I just wanted to understand, what's your advice in terms of literally managing that? How do you manage that?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Because I realize maybe that the interprets, I don't want you to think interpret means go off on a tangent. What I mean by interpret is make the facts more real for the audience. And a great way to do that is by giving examples. And I'll show you later, but I maybe state it now because I think you can state it a couple of times, is that if you give a graph, for example, in your answer, I want you, as a matter of rule or a rule of thumb, is to give an example in how to interpret that graph. Because all of your actuarial students, you're very analytically minded. You might look at a graph and fully understand what that graph is saying, but your audience may not. And specifically with this question, it's a good example, is that you're sending it out to households who have all range of, across the spectrum of financial literacy, of understanding graphs. And so the more you can interpret for them, the more information you can make come alive to them, the better. So that's different from maybe stating something that the question's not asking. And I'll go through that. So just remind me to give you an example of that. But it's really making a point relevant for the audience, and not just, don't assume if I put the table in or I put the graph in, my audience knows what that graph is saying. I want you to give examples, and we'll go through that. I hope that makes a bit more sense. I don't want you to, certainly I don't want you to recommend when the question hasn't asked you to recommend. That's a very difficult thing to get around to passing. If you recommend, usually it means you're going to fail that question if the question hasn't asked you to recommend. So I would err on the side of not recommending unless the question specifically says recommend a choice. Okay, so let's tackle this question. As I'm sure you're aware, the question was about a town experiencing a drought. As I said, it was in the midst of actual a drought in South Africa. So it was quite a real thing at the time. It still is. I hope everyone's still saving water. They gave you data on the 4 dams. I'm not sure if the screen is big enough for you all, but we will go through it. So I'm just putting the question there just for relevance, but we'll go through it. And they also gave you, they told you that there'd be a change in a tariff system. So there was an old system and now there's a new system. And you'll see this is quite a common scenario across the exam papers. I'm sure if you've done enough of them, you'll have a look and you'll see often you're asked to compare something old versus new. And the most recent exam had that in the medical aid space. If any of you sort of, I'm sure you would have written it. That's why we're here. But that exam, if you remember, you recall, there was an old medical aid system, and they wanted to revise it to a new one, and how they charge. This is the same. You have an old system and you have a new system. So, in other words, you should get very familiar or comfortable with being able to compare items. Now, there are lots of ways to compare. You can use tables to compare. You can use words and sentences just to compare. Depending on how much detail they give you, you can use graphs to compare. But I want you to really get comfortable with comparing systems or scenarios. But with this specific one, the new system benefits low users. You're told that the higher users will be penalized. And when you read that, I want to make sure that when you're doing the maths behind, from a technical point of view, that backs up. Your calculations are backing up what you're seeing, and that's that whole level-headedness. You need to be able to continually check. Actually, what if I'm calculating? Does it make sense? Does the question? Does my answer back up what the question's telling me. You mentioned you're instructed to do a pamphlet to explain the change. As I mentioned, you can use graphs, you could use tables, you could use words, depending on how you feel will be the most relevant for this question to explain this change. And then it says also between 450 and 550 words. Just on the word, I always tell students, please make sure make sure that you get within that bound, but more than that, try and maximize the words that you can use. So I would encourage you to try and get as close to the 550 range as you can, but your goal is not to sit there and try hit the word target. Your goal, as I mentioned before, is to find the instructions and answer those instructions in as succinct a way as possible. So a simple way, short, sweet, hit the nail on the head for that instruction. And if you answer the sections you're supposed to be answering, the instructions, and use the information they've given you, you should find yourself in the middle of that range somewhere. That's why that range is there. It's been drafted so that an answer to the questions would fall somewhere in there. And use that range as a guideline. If you have too few words, if you're finding yourself your answer is about 420 words, it means in all likelihood, you've missed a section. You haven't found an instruction that you had. So then your planning wasn't as good as what it should have been. If your answer is about 600 or over the 550, it means that you've waffled, essentially. You've used too many words. You might have done your opening paragraph as a common place to put too many words, but you've used too many words to say something. You might have said the same thing twice, for example, but we'll get into that. So you've got to try hit the nail on the head. And do it as simply as possible. Okay, Jared, so this was the... Yes.
Jared, can I also just say, as a reminder to everybody, that the words that you use in a graph or a table, and even the figures that you use, because a figure is counted as a word, they all counted in that word count as well. So please remember to count your words in the graphs and the tables. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
So important, and I remember a couple of years ago we had an answer from a student, and they used many graphs and tables, and their answer was excessively long, but their word count came in the right range. So if it was this answer, they would have said about 525. So, but their answer was about 4 pages long, and it was because they hadn't taken the graphs into account. They scored a lot of marks from a technical point of view because they used 4 pages to answer, but you can imagine they would have been heavily penalized from a communication point of view because they just flat out disregarded the number of words that you could use or ignored the tables as contributing. Okay, so I've now taken the whole question. So this is the whole question, and just bear with me that there's a reason why I'm doing this. I want to show you, if you remember, I've said there are 3 categories of information. So this is your exam for this question. This is what it looked like. And if you were to take a highlighter and highlight in terms of all 3 categories of information, this is what your page is going to look like. Okay, so now I want the 3 categories of information. I've got 3 different colors on the page. The red is the most important. The red are the instructions. So remember I said your most important goal is to find those instructions. Typically they are towards the end of the question, not always. So don't assume that. You read every single sentence and categorize them into the different categories. What I don't want you to do, though, I'm not saying don't do what I've done here and highlight your whole paper because you're wasting time. But what I do want you to do, in however way you do it, is highlight the red parts. So your goal is to find those red parts. But then I want you to realize, if you look over the rest of the paper, all the yellow. The yellow are the facts. That's the second category of information. Those, and I've gone through it, everything that I've highlighted in yellow was worth some sort of mark from a technical point of view. So what you first should see is that there's a lot of yellow, so there are a lot of marks available. But what I also want you to note is that there's not one sentence that I haven't highlighted here in some color. The final one is the green, and that's the context. If you recall, it's the thing that will help shape your answer, help shape your response, make you so that you don't go down a rabbit hole. as I said. You know, for example, if you can see my cursor, this is where they mention how many households there are in Aridville, which you had to use in your answer. But you didn't have to use the fact that they say these are the only users of water in the town. They are telling you that so that you will shape your answer and you won't make an assumption that there are more users, you know, to dilute the usage. So that's something that help shape your answer. The other thing that they helped shape your answer was the fact that you can assume households know 1 megaliter equals 1,000 kiloliters. Again, it's helping you understand, I suppose, the literacy of your audience, but it's also that you don't have to worry about explaining 1 megaliter equals 1,000 kiloliters, so you don't waste words on that. So do you see how there are certain bits of information that you can categorize into your context, the green, into your facts, the yellow, and into the instructions, which you have to answer. So the red parts, if you answered these first red parts here but completely forgot to read the rest here or skimmed through it, you wouldn't pass this paper, because this is the whole section. And a lot of students might have missed this last little part here that says the pamphlet must include at least one graphic. So if it's telling you that that's an instruction, you have to have at least one graphic. We still had students who had no graphics, and it was a clear instruction, so you would have penalized yourself by not answering that. So I don't know if there's any, is this obvious? I'm hoping it's not. I'm hoping that it's a bit of an aha moment that you're looking and going, okay, I really didn't realize when Jared said use each sentence, that actually you do use each sentence. Again, I'm saying don't highlight everything like this, you'll waste time, but certainly find the red bits and use the yellow bits to answer the red bits. And once you've got these red bits, it'll form the structure, the skeleton of your answer. And I want to show you that here. So these are the red bits that I've just pulled out. So the red bits were draft a pamphlet. So I have to answer that. I have to do a pamphlet, otherwise I'm really shooting myself in the foot. Up to 550 words. So really, as I say, those, try keep to that. I have to explain the tariff revision to households. So you have to explain the different what is happening, how's the tariff system changing. It has to form part of your question because that was an instruction. You have to cover the municipality's water concerns. So however way you do that, you could have a section that covers their concerns. It could be a theme throughout your answer that you're continually reminding them that the municipality is worried about it, or that we're in a drought scenario, which is how they covered it in the beginning. You have to encourage the households to save water. These were specific instructions in the exam. And that should maybe form a theme throughout, continuously. That really speaks to your tone and your style, that the pamphlet has to continuously nudge people to saving water. That was the point of the pamphlet. So if you really didn't touch on the fact that you need to, as a household, save water, then you really missed that section. And from a communication element, Billy and her team would really look at your answer and say, you're not really answering what the question's about. You didn't quite get the answer. Then you must contain a generic section on water and a specific section to that specific household that was being sent that pamphlet. Now, this is a key thing, and I wrote it like this on purpose because this was one sentence in the exam. And often you'll find this in the exam is that you might read a section and you read this and you say must contain a generic section on water, and you say great, and you write that down. Then you forget about the second part of that sentence. That little word and has actually told you there are two instructions. There are two sections or two parts to that instruction that you have to answer. And I see this quite often is that students then forget about the second half. So don't do that. Make sure that you read each sentence very carefully to make sure that you've covered the ands and the thens and the buts and the becauses or whatever it may be, that you get more than one instruction out of that sentence and make sure you answer it. So yeah, your graphic had to have both the generic and a specific section for household usage. And then the one that we've mentioned must contain at least one graphic. At least one means you could have two, no problem. But bearing in mind, you don't want to waste words. But if you felt that two graphics would have been better, I did. I certainly thought two would be better in this one, and I'll go through that. but at least one meant you have to have at least one. Otherwise you'd lose quite a bit of marks. And I mean, Billy, am I right in saying that a graphic could also be a table? It doesn't necessarily have to be a graph. We do normally expect it to be a graph, and I would encourage it to be. But would we accept a table as a graphic?
We would, but the thing is that it mustn't be a cut and paste from the exam paper. It must be enhanced in some way. So it must be, yeah. Once again, that would be a way in which you interpret it. So it mustn't look exactly like it looked. And the thing about this is that the comparison must come through in the graphic. That's the big thing about the graphic. The graphic is a sort of illustration of the comparison. Otherwise, it's not. It's just informative, right? So that's where the real tricky part came with this particular question. That one graphic, it would have been best if that graphic showed the past and the present, how they merge, at which point, you know, yeah, you'll go into that, I'm sure. So and also the graph is great, but also there's such a range of graphs that one must be careful, must be wise about that, the choice of graph, a bar or a line or whatever, you know, which one works best. So there's also that nuance. But yes, indeed, you must have, you were quite right about that. We were also expecting it.
And it's a great, there's a couple of great points that you said there. I mean, the one on choose the graph that's the most appropriate. Spend time thinking about what graph would look best. Don't just choose the first one that pops up. So that's key, because your goal is to communicate as best as possible. And so use the graph that does that. That's the one. And the other is, if you read this as at least one graphic, if you read it that you're only doing one graphic, or let's say the question said include one graphic in your exam, then you wouldn't necessarily go and say, well, cover the municipality's water concerns. Probably not the most important section out of this. I hope you all agree. As Billy says, that there's this whole tariff structure that's changing. So if you had only one graphic to use it on how to better explain the cost implications of this tariff structure in some way, and we'll get into that. But you know, really the point, I guess, is that don't just, because it says one graphic, don't just choose something and throw a graphic at there. Use the one that makes the most sense. So everything you do has meaning, has purpose, but your goal is to really find these instructions and answer these sections. And as I said, yeah, these form the basis of your answer, because now I've done a lot of the work has been done. First of all, I want you to note that there were 7 instructions in this exam, and it's not just one question. If you know, yes, it's question 1, but there are 7 instructions that I needed to answer. So 7 sections I need to be able to tick off at the end and say I'm comfortable that I've answered all 7, because then as a technical marker, certainly you're going to be making me very happy, and I'll be able to give you lots of marks. But they form the basis of your answer. In other words, now I can use these sections and start thinking what makes sense from an ordering point of view. I know I need to, you know, obviously I'm going to draft a pamphlet, so that's not going to be a section per se, but I have to explain the tariff revision. I have to cover water concerns. I have to encourage to save water. So maybe I want to encourage the household to save water as at the end, once they understand the cost implications. I want to cover the municipality's water concerns at the beginning to create a bit of context. I'm going to have a generic section, possibly before the specific one, because I want to show how the cost structure is, or how it works from a generic point of view. In other words, affecting anyone, just a random example. And then I'm going to go into the specific household. You could have done it the other way around. It probably didn't make much sense to do it the other way around. I hope you agree. And then the graphic you could put anywhere in here, and as I say, it probably made the most sense when you're talking about the cost implications. But you see how now I can, once I've got these written down, I've identified these 7 instructions, I can use it to form my answer. Sometimes with slides, it's nice, you get an agenda slide. We never used to get that actually when I used to write exams, but you get an agenda slide a lot of the time to prompt you into answering the different sections. But even then, even if you get that agenda slide, I want you to have pulled out the instructions from the exam and then compare it to your agenda and enhance your agenda slide because you know the sections you have to answer. So hopefully that makes a bit more sense. And now we can, I guess, jump into the actual answer. So the solution looked like this, and we'll go through it. But I want to maybe draw. I don't know. Is the screen, is it big enough on this, or do I have to jump to another screen, or can everyone read this?
I can read it.
Yeah, it's big enough.
Okay, great, because we'll use it as the basis. But from a technical point, I'll jump into the spreadsheet and I can show you what we've calculated. But as was mentioned earlier, this is possibly not the most difficult of answers to do, or from a technical point of view. But you'll see there's my one graphic. I mean, yes, as we said, a table can also form a graphic. But this was a great way to illustrate the different price systems, because immediately you can see that the new price system is more expensive at the higher usages and less expensive at the lower usages than the old system. So that's what this graphic was saying. But even then, as we mentioned, the interpret the data, you'll see that you should always have a section that refers to this. So I would even have liked to refer. I mean, I think they refer to it here. Yeah, sorry. This is, it says, for example, if a household uses 11 kiloliters of water. So what they're doing, they're giving you an example that helps you interpret this table that you've now put in. So Billy mentioned, don't just copy paste the table. You'll see that this table is slightly different from the exam. The exam, I'm just going to flick back to the exam. The exam had the table looking like this. So you can see that there's different bands of water used. They've then interpreted it as an answer, a better way to sort of see this, because maybe this would also help with understanding, as was raised, it was a little bit of a tricky one, is to actually say that each block has a number of kiloliters that you can use in that block until you move to the next block. But having said that, if you look at this block, you might not necessarily draw that conclusion. So what is great, interpret this for the user or for the audience by using an example. It's a great way to do it, no matter when, and you could even have done it here by drawing a line somewhere to just say your household used 21 kiloliters. So maybe you would have drawn a line over here on the graph if you wanted to, or had a spot, or a dot to sort of say this is where your usage is and this is how you read the graph. But this is a simple enough graph, I think, to sort of have realized this, but we'll get into that. But so you can see that this is where I'm talking about interpreting the data, because what I don't want you to do is just copy paste this table in and move on. That doesn't help because you haven't made this come alive to the audience. But if I now say if a household uses 11 kiloliters of water in a month, they will only pay for the 6 kiloliters because the first 5 are free. And what's nice here is as well, this says the word free, whereas in the exam it said naught, for example. So there are ways that you can interpret it for the audience that are to receive this piece of communication. Okay, so before we sort of read through these little elements, I want to go from a technical point of view because that's why we're here. But these are the calculation points that we wanted to really see from a technical point of view. Is that the dams run dry in 5 months, and I'll show you how to calculate that. Because you got given all the information for that you got given the average household usage per month, you were given the number of households, and you were given the total current level. So by using those three, you can then work out how long that's going to run out. And it's a very, very simple calculation, which I'll show you if you haven't done it already. But I guess why would we have known to do that? Not many students got that point. You had to tackle the fact that the municipality's water concerns. Remember, that was one of the instructions. And I'll show you the table, or at least I did a graph of the table as well to show where the water level's sitting. But if you go one step further, and this is where I'm talking about the level-headedness and taking a step back and looking at things from a high level, to sort of say, is that enough information? Can I actually help? What are people worried about? They're worried about running out of water. So actually, when are we going to run out of water? And you could have used that from the data. So the really good students did, and you can see that it runs out in 5 months. Another section that you had to work out was an example calculation for the generic household, and you could use any. You could see there that they used, I think it was 11 kiloliters, but you could use any just to help that with that generic section. You had to have a graph comparing the two systems' costs. As we mentioned, you knew you had to have one graphic in there, so that was probably the most useful one. You had to have the specific household cost. Once you knew how to work out the new system, then you can work that their current, they're paying 48 Rand, but their new one, they would, on the same usage, pay 70 Rand 50, and we'll look at how to do that. And you had to calculate the savings to get to the same cost as before. Not many students did this. So what this means is that they are currently paying 48 Rand on the old system. They're going to pay 70 Rand 50. So how much must they save to get back to the 48 Rand? And it's 3 kiloliters, and we'll show you that now. And then there was a family of 4 saving tips that they gave at the end of the exam paper. And you know, it would be a great way. Why they're telling you these tips? Yes, you could just have regurgitated that in some way, shape, or form, and you would have got some marks. But really, you could have used that information in some way to show how a family of 4 could save. You were told it's a specific example. You knew that the pamphlet was going to a family of 4, so you could really easily show what a family of 4 could save. And they used the shower example, which I'll show you as well, to save 4 kiloliters of water. But let's have a look at the spreadsheet. I'm going to now see if I can pull up a spreadsheet onto the screen. So I'm wondering if this is going to work. Just, can you see the spreadsheet?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
It looks
great.
good.
Cool. So I mentioned that I would have done 2 graphics in this. You don't have to. You could have done just the one. If you did do just one, then I wanted to see this one here. But let's just go through how to quickly calculate. And this, I tried to do this spreadsheet under as quick as possible. So you might look at it and say, that's not the way I would have done it. And that's perfectly fine. I didn't try and make it look pretty. I do try and make the graphs look good enough to put in my communication exam. In other words, I have labels on the axes, I have a heading, and then I would interpret them for the audience if I put this graph in, for example. But certainly it's very important to have, and I replicated the one that you saw in the solution, just and we'll go through that. But briefly, the table at the beginning gave you 4 years worth of data in terms of the total volume of the water in our dams. I've kept it in megaliters, so I just wrote it like that. And I wanted to graph this. So I did this in real time when I was reading through the paper, and I wanted to see, actually, I like the fact that I can see that this year is very low compared to the 3 previous years. So if I were to answer this paper, I would have put this graphic in there, and I would have said something along the lines, as you can see, we are currently sitting at about half the level. And you can look at what is the average level of the dams in the past 3 years. I can look and see that it's 267, which is almost double to the, almost exactly double where we are in 2016, which means that a good way to interpret this graphic, and by interpreting, and I'm making it good from a communication aspect, but I'm also answering one of the instructions. The instructions was to tackle the municipalities' water concerns, right? So what better way to then say, actually, we're at half the level that we were in the past 3 years. That's concerning. What I could also have done is drawn a line. Quite simply, just, you can really easily just insert a shape, for example, draw a line. You could add it as an axis to the graph, or as a data point, should I say, that goes down, but you don't have to do that. You could really just overlay a graphic with an arrow going down to show that the trend. But this is where the higher level thinking came, where you sort of say, what are the concerns of the municipality? The concerns is that we're going to run out. So when are we going to run out? I can work out that it's going to be here in 5 months' time, or just under 5 months' time. And I've got the number of households. I've got the current usage. I'm told it's 16.8 kiloliters. Work out what the per month usage is by really just taking the product. And then I can work out how many months I've got left, because I know what the current level is, and I know what they use per month, and I've times it by 1,000 just because I'm working in megaliters here. I wanted it to get to kiloliters there. and that gets an answer 4.96. This is a very, very quick, there's nothing very technical here, but this answer would now give me a really good piece of information to use in my answer to raise the municipality's water concerns and actually get a lot of marks in the as a result. So hopefully that makes sense in order to see how we got the 5 months of water capacity left. A key part though was to say the only way we would run out of water is if we didn't get rain and the usage stayed the same. Those are the assumptions I'm making here. So it's important to state that as well. It's not a fact. You know, as we all know, day zero didn't hit us luckily because we changed our water usage and then we managed to get rains later on. But it's something that I want you to bear in mind when you're answering questions, no matter what the question is that you're answering. Make sure you don't make a statement of fact if you can't back it up. So always say expected or undercurrent situation. Yeah, I think there's a question.
Apologies, sir. I've been looking at these, and honestly, this is not where where my mind was gravitating towards in terms of the question itself, right? Because I mean, this is completely outside the traditional field, and completely out of like our comfort zone and what we're normally used to. So okay. I think my question sort of has like a comment and sort of a question, right? So I'll sort of start with a comment in the sense that I think for me personally, why I've sort of found it a bit tricky was it was outside what I'm normally used to in terms of communicating. So you would find that, do I think this is too technical or it's not too technical? And in terms of what do I not include and what do I include? So that was probably what was very tricky about this. And within like my question is, I'm looking at what the spreadsheet that you've been doing now, and completely my mind did not actually gravitate towards this. So I was just asking in terms of a tip, what do you advise students to do, especially in such questions? Like, how do you, like, what would you advise them to do in terms to sort of like allow them to think outside the box like this? Or does it come with a lot of practice, I assume?
So it does come with practice, but I want you to realize you don't have to, let's say you didn't do this, because I'm a little bit confused what you mean when you say your mind doesn't gravitate towards this. So you may,
okay.
if we jump back to this.
So apologies if I can just get in there. So in terms of gravitating towards, what I mean is that like the certain calculations and the graphics that you included. So what I tried to do was I really tried to stay brief and really tried to stay to the brief of the question. So I didn't really go to the spread to Excel and do all those graphs, if you get what I mean. So yeah, so I was just asking, like, what's your advice in terms of like literally, what would you say students should do in order to kind of like allow them to sort of try to think outside the box within that manner?
Okay, so let's say, and I think I mentioned that before, is that you didn't need Excel for this one. You really didn't. So I know I'm showing you an Excel page that maybe it looks a bit daunting. I apologize for that, but it's not. But let's say you didn't think this way. Okay, what you should have thought though, if I go back to the slides, and I'm going to go back to this. This is what I want you to do. Every student, because you're not going to pass the exam if you don't get what the instructions are, right? So I hope we all agree that we want to find the instructions. And then as part of that, you would have to cover the municipality's water concerns. Now, the way I'm sort of suggesting that is that you've been given in part of the exam, if I just jump to, sorry, I'm going to jump to the exam, you were given this table. And so if you wanted to, let's say you pay, I don't want you to just paste things in, but let's say you pasted this table into your answer, and then you explained and you said, this is the water usage of the dams, and actually you can see that the dams in the past had an average of, I think it was 2.6, as we said, and now we're sitting at 1.3. I think it says it here. I blocked it, but yeah, 1.3. And so you chose to do that. In other words, you haven't opened Excel yet, right? All you've done is you've reproduced a version of this graph, and you've said that we're currently sitting at 1325, which is half the level that it was before. That is great. So that's fine. But I guess my point is that as long as you are answering these instructions, that is fine. You do it in your way, but answer these instructions. You might get a little bit, it might be a bit tricky to do a graphic. As we said, you could do a table, and that's fine. And let's say you've got a calculator next to you and you want to work out different price points, that's fine. You could have done that. You could have done a table of that. So there's no need. The quickest way would have been Excel, really, and the nicest way. And so I would get comfortable with using Excel, and certainly in the next question, you needed Excel for that. The maths, it's a much more simple process if you use Excel to do it, and I want you to get comfortable with doing that. But this one, as you say, your mind should have gravitated to answering these however you thought you could. I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, you have. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, maybe, yeah, as I say, so if we so if we go to the spreadsheet again,
I just wanted. Sorry, Jared, I just want to jump in there. So what Jared is presenting to you is obviously a very strong technical side, and a lot of the time communication comes in there, as you've noticed. Now, you said you didn't gravitate towards, it wasn't obvious for you, Rialeboho. Well, the thing is too that if you're thinking about the communication to your audience and you're thinking communication about the concerns, then this type of comparison would naturally come to the fore for you. But if so combine them is what I'm saying. Combine. If you're getting stuck technically, think back communicatively. If you're getting stuck communicatively, think back technically, and then see whether you can draw those two together. That's what I'd like to say.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And it's a great point, because I mean, if you read, as I say, one of the instructions was raising the concerns, and you got that table of all those numbers. That table's not nice to look at. It's got a lot of big numbers, and it's not nice from especially given your audience, right? If you were sending this to a technical audience that were analyzing a new system to measuring water capacity, that's a different story. But we're not doing that, right? We're having a pamphlet that's going to every household. So a simple graphic like this is actually a great way to take that complicated table. And I've just taken the totals. I haven't shown the 4 dams. That's maybe something to just point out, that I'm really just using the totals, because I don't think the 4 dams were necessary. Plus, we weren't given the splits, the current split. We were only told the total. So you really want to then, how do I best represent the water concerns? Well, I can say that the municipality, we're currently at half the level that we have been in the past 3 years. That was enough to get a good amount of marks and hit home that we're concerned about where we are currently with the water usage. The 5 months is an added benefit, an added piece of information that would have got you, I think it was about 3 marks. So this should have taken you less than a minute. If you didn't think about it, not a problem. It's 3 marks that we wouldn't have got, and it's not going to make or break if you're tackling all the sections. I promise you now, it's not something that you have to worry about. So hopefully that just helps a little bit. What you do want is you want to contain a graphic, and this is where I come to this section here. So let's say you didn't have this graphic, you just mentioned it in a table or in a sentence. You just said, currently at half where we were. I think the graphic, as I say, is a pamphlet for me. I always think if you look at pamphlets in the post, there are pictures, right? So for me, I would have used 2 graphics, but if you just wanted to use one, you want to use the one that's the most powerful, and I think it's this one. So now what I've done is now I've said you could use any level. I've just replicated the one in the solutions just to show you how they did it. But if you wanted to cut it off, at 20 liters, kiloliters, that's fine. But all I've done very quickly is I did the numbers 0 to 25. And on the old system, which we know is 3 Rand per kiloliter, I then quite simply say the number of liters times by 3, right? That's why that 3 is over there. So as you can see, I'm saying 6 times 3, but there's a caveat. We know this block here, this gray block, the first 5 are free. Okay, so I can only start charging from 6. And if the first 5 are free, well, if I use 6, then that means I'm only being charged for 1/5, one kiloliter extra at 3 Rand a kiloliter. So my answer should be 3. And the way I've done it, as I say, you can do it in different ways, but the way I've done it is really just to say the 6 minus the 5 times by the 3. And I've carried that formula down all the way, and that's how I've got these numbers, right? They're all the same. It's really the 25 minus the 5 times by the 3 gives me 60. And that forms this blue line. So my blue line is really just graphing that. I'm hoping that you're all comfortable enough to be able to do this. If not, I would encourage you to do this, to try. I want you to be able to replicate this, just so that you get comfortable with graphing numbers and working out in Excel, because it's going to save you a lot of time. The new system is a little bit more tricky. We've given a table that charges you R2.25 between 6 and 11, and it charges you R4.50 after 11 up to 17, and then R7.50 onwards, and then anything above 23 was charged at 11. So that's a little bit more tricky, and you can do it however you want to work out the cost. The way I did it was really just you could see I'm minusing 5. I've actually hard coded in there, but I'm minusing 5 from my water usage for the first block, because the first 5 are free, and charging at R2.25. So exactly as we did with the 3, this one's R2.25 is being charged kiloliter in this block for this point. It's a little bit different, because now what I need to do is I need to charge the next, 6 kiloliters in this block at R4.50. But I've already got 11 kiloliters that have been charged differently, so I have to minus the 11. That's where that comes from. And I want a running total of the cost, so I have to add the previous cell. So that might be a little bit more complicated to do, and I will admit I had to, when I did this, I'm just sense checking it, because I know what it should be from a calculation point of view, so I have to make sure that my Excel's doing what I wanted it to do. But once you did, and as I say, practice, I want you to replicate this. Once you understand what the sliding scale is doing, you can work this out. And then I've got my different cost systems, and again I can graph that one. And once I've got a graphical representation of it, the answer was also alluding, the question was alluding to the fact that the 14 was, it mentioned it was the national average 14 kiloliters. But what you can work out is that 14 should have the same cost, and I want you to sense check it, and this comes where the staying calm and level-headed comes in, because 14 on the old system, you're getting 5 free, so you have to then take the 9 kiloliters above at 3 Rand. So we know 9 times 3 is 27. So on the old system, it cost me 27 Rand if I use 14 kiloliters. On the new system, well, I'm getting charged R2.50 for these first 5 kiloliters, and then R4.50 for the next 3 to get me 27. So you would want to check that calculation is working. But why I've highlighted this in yellow is that 14 was a key data point, because it's exactly the point where the two graphs cross, where the old system and the new system are exactly the same from a cost point of view. In other words, if a household uses 14 under the old system or the new system, they'll be charged the same. But more importantly, if they use less than 14 on the new system, they'll be charged less than what they would have been on the old system. And if they use more than 14, in other words, more than the national average, then you're being penalized. And that was the whole point of the system. That was what the question was moving you towards, was to say that you're going to be penalized if you're a high user. And you're a high user if you're using more than the average. And they told you what the average was nationally. It was 14. They said that Aridville are bad water users because they're using 16.8 as their average. So they're above average. So we're going to penalize them. We want to encourage people to save water. How are we going to do it? Well, we'll penalize you if you use more than the national average. So I'm hoping this graph helps illustrate that. And now you would use this information in your answer. The final bit of information that you may have calculated, I mentioned about the family of 4. And I just wanted to show you, this is just the brief calculation that I did here, really, is that they said that in a month, or I think it was the showering, was that you can save 16 kiloliters per minute for a family of 4. So really, if you take 16 liters for 2-minute shower for 4 people for a month, I just said a month is 30.5 on average. You could have said 30 there, no problem. The point is that it tells you how many kiloliters that is, and then you can say, and this could be anything. You don't have to use. You could have used 1 minute. If you said a family of 4 each save 1 minute a day on their showering, they'll save just under 2 kiloliters a month. The point is that you're interpreting the data, you're making it come alive for the audience. That is, I would say, a cherry on top. It's not something that you have to do. If your question was, how do you get your mind to gravitate towards that? If you're hitting the most useful information, the information that's really been asked, then you can then add flavor like that. But don't stress about these little things. I would much rather you answer the instructions that are given, and then you can add here and there, add flavor, but don't, as a go-to, don't try add nuances to it if you haven't got the groundwork in place. So that's some of the technical parts of question 1. If I'm just going to jump back now to my presentation, just hopefully that hop back to the presentation. But that was to calculate these technical points that I've laid out there. That was the spreadsheet. And yeah, I apologize if the spreadsheet looked a little bit daunting. It's not supposed to. It may have, because that was the way my mind worked. And your spreadsheet may look very different. You may not have gone to a spreadsheet, as I said, which was fine for this one. It would be a bit difficult to do the next question without a spreadsheet. One thing maybe I didn't show you, sorry, if I'm just looking at this, is this level here. So if we just jump back to spreadsheet, so I've highlighted in yellow here, you can see that the current level of usage of that family, I think, was 18. And so they're going to have a bill of 48 Rand. Sorry, 21. Sorry, yeah, the current one's 21. On the old system, they're 48 Rand. They will be charged 70 Rand 50 under the new system. So what do they have to do in order to get back to the same cost under the new system? Well, they have to save that many liters, right? So 21 to 18. So that's where the 3 kiloliters came from. So that was a higher order sort of thinking to sort of say, well, what will the family want to know? That you're telling them that their bill is going to go from 48 Rand to 70 Rand 50, which you got marks for saying that, because that's where the specific section came in. One of the instructions was to answer from a specific family point of view. They would want to know, how can I get back to what I was being charged? Well, tell them you can save 3 kiloliters of water. And that's where this sort of example then came in, that you might then would have said, okay, actually this should be a 2 because I want them to save at least 3 kiloliters of water to get back to their old bill. So that was I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so that spreadsheet then allowed me to answer all of these points, and these are all the points that would have appeared in the model solution. It doesn't mean that it had to appear in your solution, but you would have maximized the points available or the marks available if you'd got all of these. Are there any questions before I show you some of the things that we were looking for? Is everyone still following?
I think just in terms of not taking a graphic or that table, for example, as it is from the question, for me, that it just seemed perfect. It just seemed like a table I could take into my solution. But maybe now, seeing that in terms of 0, instead of 0, for example, they wrote 3 on that model solution. For me, that's the only thing that I think could have been changed. Even looking at the suggested solution versus what they gave in the question, I still think what was given in the question is clearer.
Yeah. But if you feel that way, that's fine. If you can then substantiate what's going on in that. I mean, I would always try and not copy paste, right? It doesn't mean, sometimes you do need to use what information you've been given, and if you felt that it was the best way to put it in there, then then I suppose you can do that. it's,
Okay,
I don't know,
that
Billy, if
means
there's something,
it's
that you want to add there, but it's, the free and the unlimited part, I guess, are the ways that you could have changed it, and this could have been the bands as they were before. But
definitely, I think there are ways in which you can come at it, but we really want you to enhance the whatever you get from the question paper. So I was just a bit concerned because clearly Masondo can't get into the meeting, and I was just trying to find a way of getting him in.
sure.
Yeah, so I missed that last little bit, but I'll pick it up a bit later if there's anything else that I haven't managed to comment on. Sorry for that.
No worries.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just move on. This is just sorry.
Maybe before you move on, Jared, sorry, you can go back to the model solution. Just want to ask, I'm confirming the obvious here.
Yeah.
Billy, you mentioned that I need to count all the numbers, so I'm trying to see if I need to have all the way until 120, or I can use a different scale so that I have fewer numbers in there, because I must count 0, 20, 40, 60 and the likes, right? Am I correct, Billy, in my word count?
You're talking about the axis here?
Yeah, the axis. To say when I include in my total word count, I must count the two words like random amount, like those two words.
I wouldn't.
Then I must count.
No, so I wouldn't. I mean, Billy, you can back me up here, but it's really about these words here. I would even hesitate, and that's probably why there's this around 500, because you can interpret, how many words are in this. But if you really look, there's 5 in the heading. You've got another 4 there, and you can add another 4 there. I wouldn't start adding all of these up, but maybe I'm wrong, Billy. I mean, I would much rather, from a technical point of view, have this scale here, so that this is shown in a better way. Yeah, I wouldn't. You can see I've missed. Well, this is the model selection solution, but my graph did the same. Is I missed every second number here. I did that purely that if you do include, it goes 1, 3, 5. It looks a bit crowded. So to clean this graphic a little bit, that's why we removed that scale. I wouldn't worry about the word count from that point of view. But Billy, I don't know if
No, they can get very sticky. There's several markers, I just want to say, and my instinct is not to count figures in graphs, but to count the words in graphs. The words must be there because you have to label it, and you must label your axes as well. You must give a title, and of course you must have a legend there: new price, old price. So it's just that that these figures are definitely counted in tables. In graphs, I would always argue when we meet on the exam, especially if it's tight, to get into the word count, to allow for those numbers and not to be counted, those figures. But I think what you need to do is you need to say to yourself, I might have to. Please, I want you to count them anyway. But if you go slightly over, it's not damning. If you go slightly over, it was 550 and you went to 565 or something. It's not damning. It just means that you didn't get the full complement. But if everything hangs together, then of course it's a very different story. The question paper that Jared mentioned earlier, that person put in 5 or 6 graphs in an email, and that also you can't even read because it's just one long strip, isn't it? And then it just goes on forever, and you can't even see the differences between the graphs. So there, it didn't help the person at all, even from a visual point of view. So so just count them is what I'm saying, and state that you've done so. If you state that you've done so, the mark is going to be a lot more sympathetic towards you. So you say figures and words in graph equals 550. Figures and words in graphs has put me over, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So do that.
And as I say, go do the thing that looks the best from a communication point of view, and that the word count then should come second to that, if you know what I mean, because you're going to get, if you really put in a lot of words and it looks messy, you're going to lose, you're going to be double hit, because you're going to be adding in words, and then you also, it's not going to look good or communicate very well.
Hi, Jared, Henku here.
Hi.
Jared, just a quick question. How much time out of the hour and a half did you allocate to your Excel workings?
Yeah, great question. I didn't time myself, but I would have said that spreadsheet was probably between 10 and 15 minutes. I think that I did that spreadsheet. I did revisit it, so that's what's difficult for me to say. Like, and then I grade out the one section. I wouldn't have graded out if it was me writing an exam. But yeah, it's you have to get pretty comfortable working out things in Excel. But if it takes you longer, that's still okay, as long as you are not going down a rabbit hole. I want you to be answering the instructions. Yeah, I think that's it doesn't help making a beautiful spreadsheet because we're not seeing the spreadsheet, right? So just do what gets you the graph that you need or the answer that you need.
Okay, so there wouldn't be anything wrong with at least spending 15 minutes out of the 90 minutes on my Excel calculations to get your graphs and just understanding the info that they've given to me.
I would say you could spend half an hour on that if that's what you're achieving, because once you've got that information, the answer becomes a lot more clear. You're getting the right information down, but it's all down to planning, and you're doing it again with a level head. So your planning needs to be such that you've understood what you need to get at, and once you've got the different elements, you can then put it down. Yeah, but maybe I should touch on the time element is an important one, even though we're running a bit over time. The time element is important because generally you do 50-50. So you've got an hour and a half for your question 1, an hour and a half for your question 2. You might have a strategy that focuses on doing the easier question first and then banking time. But what I wouldn't want you to do is spend more time on question 1. We see it quite often. Question 1 gets more time, it looks beautiful. You get to question 2, there's clear evidence of time pressure and the students run out of time. So don't do that. Try stick to your time limit. And that's why the plan is so important, because you need to quickly get the instructions out of the paper and answer those instructions. Okay, so I am aware of time, speaking of which, so let's quickly move on. This is I just wanted to show you this, and you can go through the slides, but this is some examples of what we're looking for from a technical point of view. So I literally have gone through the exam papers, and then you get 2 marks for mentioning that Aridville was experiencing a drought. That was worth 2 marks. The dam levels being half of what they have been in previous years was worth 2 marks. You had to say if no further rainfall was 1 mark and current usage continues was 1 mark, then you would lose. You would run out of water in about 5 months. So there's that point when I mentioned that it was worth 3. If you had got this wrong, let's say you got that 3 months until dams run dry, you still would have got a 1 point for saying the dams are running dry, but you just got this calculation wrong. So for those of you who didn't gravitate towards this 5 months, it's fine. It was 2 marks out of the grand scheme of things. But the point is that as a marker, I've got a section on the drought, because the drought was a section, an instruction. The municipality's concerns about the drought was a section. The tariff system comparison was another section. And these are some of the things that were in there. Please, when you see a system that's changing, mention the date that it's changing. It's always worth 1 mark, at least. And your audience would want to know that, right? You'd want to know when the date, when it comes into effect. For mentioning the first kiloliters were free, that's 2 marks, and so on. What I just wanted to mention is that as technical markers, we've got about 10 marks almost always are available for meeting the objectives. So the objectives always tie in with your instructions. So if you identify correctly the instructions in your exam that you have to answer, know then that in my marking schedule, these are seen as objectives at the end. So not only are you getting marks throughout for answering those sections, but overall you'll get an answer. You'll get marks for saying, did the communication element correctly convey the drought concerns of the municipality? Then you get a mark out of 3, for example. Will an audience understand the tariff system? You get a mark out of 3, for example. So there are these 10 marks available over and above all of these marks. And what that means is that a good attempt, a student that's really answered a lot of these things and correctly identified the sections that you have to answer, are really going to score well here as well. So what we see is that we see the good attempts get really high marks, and the poorer attempts who missed out on sections get not as great, and so there is that divide. Just wanted to draw your attention to that. So maybe some common mistakes that we saw for this paper: not answering the instructions. For example, the generic versus the specific household. Some students just stuck to the generic; they didn't mention the specific one, and I feel that that's that little word "and," that the students didn't get to. That really you have to identify what the instructions are. It's your number one goal, because if you don't identify them, it's very difficult to pass. And I chalk that down to like really failing to prepare or plan. Like you really have to. It's not about you didn't read properly the question maybe, but it's because you don't have a plan that you're following. So really try prepare a plan how you tackle an exam, but identify the instructions. Then unfortunately there were a lot of calculation errors, and we've seen that this is not a difficult calculation to make from a technical point of view, but possibly it was a misunderstanding of how it worked, how the sliding scale, and I fully get that and I understand that. That's unfortunate. But yeah, to calculate the new system costs were tricky, I think, for some students. And then to calculate things like the water saving to get the old cost, some students battled with that. And I can only think that maybe it's not reading the question properly. Time constraints could have been something, but yeah, it really goes down to planning and level-headedness. Checking your answer, does it make sense? Continually ask yourself, does this make sense? Does it fit in with what the information is that they've given me? For example, silly examples: if the new system you got a cheaper rate at the higher usage, then you've done something wrong, right? So you have to really go back to the drawing board. And then just briefly, higher order thinking. So, the dam's running dry in 5 months was a higher order thinking. Water saving tip for the shower, it's higher order thinking. This is not as critical. If you're answering these ones, you're going to really get, I think, enough marks to pass, but this really separates the stronger students from the others. Okay, so that's question 1. I am aware of time. I don't know if you want to take a quick comfort break, because we can get through question 2, I think, in the 30 minutes available. I don't know, Billy, if we sort of say, do we start at past? Is that fine with everyone? If you want to take
That's fine. It's fine with me. Is that I don't want to lose anybody. I want you to still come back, right? Okay, so we'll be very strict about that. Just 5 minutes then.
Yeah, at past, I think we'll just start again.
Oh, at past. Okay. All right.
That's okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm just aware of time.
Absolutely. But it's been good time. We've had very good time. Very good value. Okay, great. We'll see each other in 5 minutes.
Chat soon. Okay, I don't know if everyone's back. Sorry, it was a very short break. Maybe if we can just have a show of hands if everyone's back. Okay.
I think we're catching up here. Everyone's coming in. 10, yeah, yes.
Great.
13 have raised hands, so that's great. I think we are ready to go for it. Thank you so much, Jared.
So I've purely, so this is obviously question 2 that we want to go through, and this one was more of a technical one, so sort of jumping into the spreadsheet on this one than question 1. But again, I'm not going to go through this again, but it's the same sort of agenda. In other words, have the same plan. Have a plan, tackle the exam the same way. So these slides are the same as the previous one, so you can go through it. But really, is just your goal is to identify the 3 categories of information, but most importantly, the instructions. Let's find the instructions and let's use the facts to answer those instructions, and use the context to guide your answer. Okay, so this question was a little bit more formal than the first one, in the sense that it was a client asking a question. That then should guide your audience, who you're talking to, the level, the tone that you're answering, you're putting your answer down as, really just the language you're using. You know that they're sophisticated financially, because you've got an excerpt of a letter, right? You can see that this person is talking. They've calculated a figure, for example, which you should have checked. And yeah, so it guides your answer in the sense that you now have a better understanding of where you can pitch your response. So yeah, use that information. The question really came down to owning a home versus renting, and this client really wanted to know whether they should just carry on renting because they believed it was the cheaper of the two, or the better in the long term from an investment point of view. But what they said they would do as an alternative to investing is they would rent and then invest the excess funds. So in other words, what they would have paid, the 60,000 as a mortgage payment, they would invest the difference between that and their current rental, which would be 27,200 in the first year, into a fixed term investment at a rate of 8%. And they'd invested for 20 years, which is the same term that they would have had their mortgage for. And the question really was, what is the better one? They believed that, and it was quite strongly, they believed that the better one was just renting in all sorts of scenarios. But you were given 2 scenarios. If you go and you find your instructions in here, you were given, it says here, address 2 different levels of growth. So again, you can see there's parallels with the previous one, comparing 2 systems, as it were. But you have to have 2 scenarios. And your 2 levels of growth between house costs were 4% versus 5% per annum. And there was this added piece that I think confused a lot of students, was that there's this additional 1% per annum house maintenance cost. And you had to consider this in some way. And even, like, I must admit, when I read it for the first time, I really wasn't sure this maintenance cost of 1%. I thought, well, how am I going to account for that? And I would have thought you would have had to use it as an expense if you owned a home. But then if you have to read every sentence, because this last sentence here tells you exactly how you're supposed to take account of the maintenance costs. It's to be allowed by assuming that an equivalent amount is invested in the fixed rate investment. So that's how you were to take care of that. Okay, and we'll get into what that looks like. And really it was to draft a letter, and again I was on the side of to the upper bound of the words, but up to 600 words. So this would have been sort of the gist of the question. As I said, always find the instructions. These are the instructions as I had them. These were the areas that you would have had to tackle in order to maximize your chances of passing. and it really forms the basis of your answer. If you look at the model solution, it's really this addressing the two different levels of growth that they've used as separate sections. But you could have had your sections in whichever way you wanted, as long as you were answering these sections. Okay, so you had to write a letter. You had to compare the future values of renting versus buying a house. You had to address the two different levels of growth in your house prices, and you had to allow for this funny 1% maintenance cost. And we know, because we've read the question properly, is that we had to allow for it by assuming equivalent amount invested in fixed rate investment. Okay, so as I said, these form the basis of the answer. And I don't, yeah, I mean, I think technically this question was a little bit more difficult. It certainly required Excel, and unfortunately there were a lot of students that couldn't calculate the correct points. And I want to show you the spreadsheet, and hopefully it'll help you with calculating, and maybe you'll see, get comfortable with calculating these, because there's a good chance that you get a similar question. This is the typical actuarial problem, you know, it's the financial sort of maths question, and it's often used for those of you who still have to do modeling exam. You know, the modeling exam has similar questions. Okay, but what are the things that you had to calculate, you know, using just this, backing up, using these instructions? What are the things that you had to calculate from a technical point of view? Well, you had to calculate the future value of the house, right? You had to allow, your spreadsheet should have allowed to be able to change between the growth rates, but you didn't have to. You could copy paste the one model and then change the interest rate, but you have to allow for it to change between the growth rates, and I'll show you that now. You had to find the future value of your investment in 20 years, and by doing that, then you can calculate the difference between the rental and the mortgage. Or in order to do that, should I say, you have to always calculate the difference between the rental and your mortgage, because that's the amount that they invest. You need the rental values for 20 years in order to do that, and I'll show you that. And then you had to add this maintenance cost top up, that 1%, right? Because that they said you have to allow for the maintenance cost by adding it to your investment. So in order to get this maintenance cost top up, you need the house costs, but we would have calculated the house costs in this future value one, which I'll show you. But a good check would be the value given in the question. The client has said to you that they had they'd calculated that their investment would be worth 1.152 million, and so that would be a good thing to check. Why? Because first of all, you want to know that you're on track, but also if you're very confident in your calculation and you feel that the client was wrong, and you have to be very confident, because if you'd want to either say that the client is right with their calculation, it's always good to say that if they've stated a number, or you have to guide them as to where they might have gone wrong, and both are possible, right? But in this scenario, you would have seen that you tie in with their answer, so it's always good to say that they're correct. But obviously, it's ignoring maintenance cost effect, because that's what the answer said. They weren't even taking maintenance into consideration. Okay, so then the final one was just the difference in the value of the investment in owning a house, because that's what the question's asking, is which one is better. And so I said it definitely requires a spreadsheet. I mean, technically you could use annuities and calculate this. If you're very comfortable with your financial maths, you could have done it. It's more easy to go wrong though, and it's easier to do this via a spreadsheet. So let's jump to the spreadsheet. So this is my same one with question 2 is over here. And you can see some of the information that I've put down in the spreadsheet. I'm hoping this is not too daunting. You've got your house cost is 5% growing at 5% per annum. I've got my rental increase 4% per annum. I know my maintenance cost is 1%. I know that my fixed investment is 8%. Those are all the numbers. And what maybe made this question a little bit tricky is there are a lot of percentages flying around, right? So you had to really read it, maybe not 3 times, maybe 5 times, just to gather your thoughts a little bit as to what the different percentages mean. Specifically because the house cost, they said, could be 4%, which then is similar to the rental increase. So that might have been a bit confusing. Then they told you your rent starting point and your mortgage was 60,000 throughout. Okay, I calculated this. You don't need to do this, right? I just wanted to check the annuity, what percentage they were using. But yeah, ignore that. So don't worry about that. So the first thing I wanted to tackle is how the house increases in value. So it starts off at 680,000, and it grows at the 5%, right? So this was a very simple calculation that I can do now for 20 years. I can quickly find using Excel that my house cost in 20 years time is worth 1.8. Okay, and that was one of the key things you had to work out. That was one of the questions. So that's a relatively easy one. The rental is a similar calculation in the sense that it grows. So it starts off at 27,200 and it grows at 4%, right? Same sort of thing. So I wanted to grow. Now you'll see I would have stopped it. My first time I actually went all the way down to the bottom, but then I realized that actually that would have been the way I've set it up. Now I'll show you why I only stopped there. But you could have gone all the way to the bottom. It doesn't change anything. I just wanted 20 years worth of investment. I'll get to that. My mortgage I know is 60,000 throughout, and the reason why I wanted this is now I've got 20 values where I can calculate the difference, because the difference is what I'm investing, right? The difference between the mortgage and the rental is what I invest. And I know as my rental increases, that difference that I've got to invest each year must decrease. And that's a good point to make. To make note to the client is just to say your amount that you're investing each year will decrease. And he rightfully said in his mail, or in his letter, if you recall, that he said even in 20 years, I'll still have something to invest, and he does. You know, in 20 years' time, he still has the difference. He has about 2,600 to invest in the investment. The other reason why I've sort of stopped it there, that this is 20 years, is that the question at the end did say the different timing of the payment. So I think it said your rental is and your mortgage are due at the beginning of the year. The reason why they're telling you that is that you know that you can then earn a year's interest for the whole year. So it's starting with the 2,700. That full amount then earns a full year's interest, and that's where I get my interest at the end for my final value. But we'll get to that. Just for now, I'm just going to ignore my maintenance costs. So let's just ignore that for now. But ignoring that, I've got each year I've got this number to grow, right? So it's really growing this number at my investment rate, which was 8%, gives me this amount at the end of the year. So at the end of year one, I've got 3,500 in my investment. At the end of year two, I've got 7,200. And how that's calculated is it's really using my previous year's value plus what I've now added to it, the 3,100. So hopefully you can see how the spreadsheet works, that this now works out what my investment is growing at. Hoping that that's sort of that you can see. And what do you see at the end here? And again, the reason why I've stopped it at 19 is because this is at the year end value. So this was at the end of year one. So this will be at the end of year 19, in other words, in 20 years time. So that's why the timing is like that. But a good way to check is that that's the number that the client was quoting. So now I know the client was right, and I know that my spreadsheet is at least doing what it's supposed to do. But there's this sneaky little 1% maintenance cost that we wanted to take into account. And how does the maintenance cost affect things? Well, my maintenance cost I know is a function of my house value. That's what they said. At each year, it's 1% of the house value. You see that? Each year I've taken the house value. And I add this as a top-up to my investment. So I was investing 32,800 under the client scenario, but actually I want to assume the maintenance cost is topping up my investment. So now I'm investing 39,600 in the first year. And so that just then adds to my investment, and that's what my interest is worth. So my true value, not what the client assumed. The client thought that this was the value that his investment would grow at. But in order, we know now that we want to make a better comparison between the house and the rental. So we want to allow for maintenance costs. So actually the value that his investment grows to is 1.64. Okay, so hopefully the spreadsheet's not too scary looking, but I hope you can see that it's much better to do it in Excel than it would be using a calculator. Yes, you can do this in a calculation. Using annuity functions, it is very possible. It's just once you get familiar with this sort of layout, and you can do it however you want. This is how my mind works, and this is how I did it. But hopefully this makes sense. I don't know if anyone's, but before I move on, are there any questions on this?
Just a comment from me, perhaps.
There is a question.
Sorry, I think there's two.
Okay.
Yeah, one
can
of you go.
ahead.
You can go on, Lebo.
All right, thank you. So, sir, I've been looking through my solution, right? And as I've been looking through my solution, so what I did was I actually added like the cost of maintenance to the value of the house, especially for the if I was the owner and if I bought it through like the mortgage bond. So what I'm trying to understand is why would I have to subtract that value of the maintenance cost from the total value of the house at the end of 20 years and actually not add it? So that's what I'm just trying to understand. Why would I not add it and actually subtract it?
So you're not subtracting it. So it doesn't affect the value of the house. In order for the person to have their house, they have to pay this 1% fee. And so the way the question wanted you to take account of that is to say, okay, right, instead of it affecting the house value, which it won't, it's basically saying in order for your house to grow at this value, you have to spend 1% a month, a year on maintenance.
Okay.
And so what they want to say is in order for you to compare this to the rental scenario, they actually want you to add 1% to the rental investment, the investment that you're doing. So it's like you're topping up your investment. You're not actually, but it's like you were. And that was what was sort of noted in the question. So if I,
all right, thank you.
Does that make sense? It's this last point, and this is something that students missed. And I think I really do think it's because it was the last bullet point. A lot of students missed it because we quite easily jump into the question before we've read through and allocate. Remember, I said allocate every single sentence. You have to know what is this guiding you towards. And it was saying allow for it by assuming that your investment grows by that amount.
Okay.
What was
Thank
the?
Yeah. If I can just comment also, this question was, I think it just had so many aspects that could have confused. Well, they definitely confused me. I just thought about what you said. Yeah, a lot of information. I just thought about what you said about counseling students and then them being surprised at some of the things that they did, because I couldn't come to that value of 1152 and I could not understand what was happening. And I only figured it out now looking at your Excel model that it's because my initial rental, for some reason, I had 27,000. I didn't see the 200. I did not.
And it's funny, your brain, honestly, it's not that you didn't read it. Your brain does some funny things under exam stress. I know I've been there, but it means that you need to, it's so important to read it calmly and carefully.
Yeah, I did. And now when I plugged in the 200, my model produces exactly this.
That's frustrating. It's satisfying and frustrating, right? Because you're getting the right value, which shows that your model. I'm happy to share the spreadsheet. Would that help? Do you want to sort of see how it works? Does that help?
Yeah.
Yes, share.
Okay. Yeah, I'm perfectly happy to. Then you can play around with it. But I'll send it with my slides.
Thank you so much. Excellent.
Yeah,
excellent.
Sure.
And you
see you play around with it.
Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, so Jared, I have a similar comment, but mine was more on the rounding, and I understand why she would have made that 200 error because all the numbers are rounded to the 1,000, right? So when I did, if you just put 0 on your maintenance cost, so we can get the 151 or 153. So even when I look at the model solution later on, you see that all the numbers are rounded to the nearest 1,000, then I get a number that is not necessarily exactly the same. Then I wonder, should I say you are right or not right? Because, or I should assume that it was rounded. So I don't know what is the guidance there.
Yeah, great point.
Because it did take away 5 minutes when I was doing this thing because I was trying to get to the exact 151,000, not 529. I could get that number, but to me, it's different to what the client has stated.
Yeah, so it's a great point, and I can't tell you a rule of thumb whether you should round or not. What I can tell you is be guided by the question. So this question, you could see that the client mentioned a rounded figure, And so then that should guide you that you can use that sort of figure. And you're dealing with quite long terms here and a lot of numbers. And so from a communication point of view, it's not really necessary that I say that this 529 at the end is not going to add or detract from this answer, right? Because the investment was worth more under one scenario and the house was worth more under the other, so by quite a bit. So it's not that it's splitting hairs. So that should maybe guide your answer. But I would have been guided by what the letter said from the client. Having said that, also, as I said, you don't want, I mean, that would be the worst things you could have done for this question, I think, because they were trying to retain them as a client. He's a new client, right? So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're friendly, professional, and help him out because you want to retain him as a client. Or the worst thing you probably do is say your answer is wrong because you're out by 500 or something, you know. So it's, you know, because he's not, that's not his question. His question is, what's which investment choice is better? So in this scenario, it would have been fine to round. And this 151 should have guided that you said, okay, well, I'm not getting the exact number, but it's thereabouts, so I must be on the right track. Yeah, and I can only encourage you to do enough past papers also to sort of get a feel for when you need accurate numbers versus not. These sorts of things, it's quite easy, it's quite fine for you to round off. I wouldn't round off so much that it's, you know, to the nearest 10,000, but to the nearest 1,000 is fine. Similarly, how I did the megaliters in the previous question, you know, I rounded off the total numbers in that graph, perfectly fine, because my goal wasn't to give an accurate of how much capacity was in the dams. My goal was to show that currently we're at about half of what we have been. And I feel that was answering the question. Hopefully that helps. But it's a pity that you spent about 5 minutes trying to reconcile exactly. It's not.
Yes, because yeah. So, but I think it makes sense. But I ended up then rounding off that number, but then the rest of the number I didn't. If I look at because I wanted to get the same answer as what the examiner had in there. But yeah, so to me it costed me 5 minutes in my timing, and that 5 minutes it can be a lot in the exam room.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah, if you wanted to give accurate numbers, that'd be fine. I just wouldn't have said to the client that he's wrong because he's giving you a number that's pretty much on that one. You know. The other thing, I mean, if you look here, I was trying to reconcile with the 60,000 mortgage. I just wanted to see for my own interest what interest rate they were using. You can quickly use this function in Excel. As I say, I'll share this, so get familiar with this. But you can see I plugged in 7%, and it's not exactly 60,000, but it's pretty much there, right? So then I know that, well, that's what they were using. It doesn't appear in the answer at all. I thought it was going to, that's why I just chucked it in, but I didn't need it, so that's why I say you can ignore this. But I'll leave it in just that you can all see how it works. Okay. So having said that, let's jump.
Sorry,
back.
Jared. Just
Yes.
one more thing from the communication point of view. We liked it when candidates said that you know, he affirmed his financial savvy, really, because that means that you're saying that he has a good understanding of these things, and it also gains proximity to your client, which is important as you want to keep him. So that was nice, and it also paves the way for you to be more accurate with, you know, the rest of it is a little trickier. So that amount you've got right, but there's other things to consider. So that's a way of saying there are these things to consider without just saying, coming straight out with it, that these are the things you have to consider, because that would alienate your audience. So thank you for that, Jack.
That's a great point, that you want to create a bit of rapport with the audience, and because you know that you're going to now tell him that actually he is wrong in a way. He's wrong in the sense that he thinks that rental is the way to go no matter what, and that's another thing. Let's just show you the spreadsheet. But you've found that actually it depends on the house cost, and I'll get into that now. But by you then saying, you're giving him a little bit, you're saying you were right with this answer, and then you're going to then tell him, but you're wrong in this area, you know. So you're doing that in a nice way. It's always nice to give someone a bit of good information before you give them a bit of bad. So you're still creating that good relationship because you want to retain them as a client. So yeah, great point. The one thing now, obviously the crux of this question is that I want to be able to change this house cost value. in other words, the gross at the home. If I change it to 4, before I do that, I mean, if I push enter, let's actually just put this 1% back in. So what I want you to see now is that this value that I've got, let's just highlight these, the values of note here. The two values there, you can see the rental and investment combo gives me 1.6. And the house cost gives me 1.8. So clearly under this scenario, the 5% house cost, this is the better way to go, because you're going to, the one thing the client is missing is that you own a house at the end of the mortgage path. You own a house that's worth 1.8. And that's why it's better to go this way under this scenario. But what happens if this, and because this was part of the question, is they're saying, what consider growth rate of 4,000, because some professionals or analysts expect a 4% rather growth rate. Well, now I see actually my investment is different. And this is why I say the spreadsheet was a much better way to go, because you see when I change this value, it affects my investment cost. Why does it affect my investment? Because this maintenance piece relies on how this grows. And so I have to be able to change this, and it affects, and I've got all, once I've built this model, a very simple model, but once I've done it, it can then tell me which is the better one. And you see actually the rental investment route is better than the house route if this is 4%. But if it's 5%, it's this way around. And this is now, you've got the tools now to deal with the answer, because now you want to then state, however you set out your answer, under the 5% scenario, my house is worth 1.8. My rental, you have to obviously explain how you got this, but is worth 1.6. Tell the client what the difference is. What is the difference? And I think I might have done it there, yeah. So the difference here is, and which you would have seen in your answer as well. That's what they're gaining by going the buying house route. But if this were to be 4%, as some analysts think, they are then 115,000 better off under the rental scenario. So your answer to the clients is that it depends. It depends on what they think these house costs are going to be, or what the house costs end up being. And for that reason, you're not giving a recommendation. And you would have seen the question did not ask for a recommendation. So if we jump back to the slides, these were the points that we've now calculated using the spreadsheet, so we can actually answer the scenario. And this is the answer, and you can go through the answer. And as I say, you can use my spreadsheet to see where all these different values are. But there is the 161 under the house cost if it's 5%. But if it drops to 4%, there's the 115 that is more beneficial to rent. And yeah, there are other numbers that they're sort of using with the maintenance costs. I wasn't too convinced that you had to use like this number here, this 491, for example, but you can still work it out. You just see if you switch on the maintenance versus not. But all of these numbers you can actually calculate using that spreadsheet. And this is one answer. It's not the answer. It's just one version of it. You can answer it differently. You will notice this is very different from the pamphlet. It's more professional. It's because there are more numbers. There are a lot of numbers flying around here. And that's because your audience is more financially sophisticated. Please have per annum after every time you say 4%, if that's what you're dealing with, or per month if you're dealing with a monthly rate. But yeah, you can go through this now and then reconcile it to that spreadsheet. But I do want to just move on in the interest of time, just to see some of the common mistakes that we found. Again, this is pretty much the same as question 1, is that you weren't answering the instructions. So it's a big mistake. Please make sure that you find the instructions that you have to answer them. And that deals with your plan and preparing for your exam. Some students gave strong recommendations either way. That was not asked for, right? So that is what we call a fatal flaw. You don't want to give a strong recommendation saying absolutely buying a house is better under all scenarios. So that's unfortunate if you did that. And one of the main things was this maintenance cost application. So I suspect some of you would have found that tricky, in that, applying this maintenance cost in the calculation was quite tricky. But if you had read that last bullet point, maybe it'll make it a little bit more clear. There were lots of calculation errors. I bolded this because it was by far the most feedback. So I went back into when I marked this back in 2016 and to sort of see what the common mistakes were. That's where these have come from. and the calculation errors were by far the greatest. As you can imagine, I think a lot of students struggled with the technical part of calculation. A lot of students thought that the house was depreciating, and I have no idea where that came from, because there's nowhere in the paper did it mention depreciation, so I'm not sure if any of you did. But it was appreciating. It was growing by 4% or 5%. But some students read it as decreasing in value by 4%. And you can imagine the numbers that we got then. It makes my life very difficult trying to reconcile to a lot of those numbers. And I don't know where that came from. So I don't know if anyone read that as well. But I think this goes down to this not reading the question properly and doing it with a bit of a level-headedness. There were some students that said the rental was better under both scenarios. So that's a calculation error, because if you'd laid out the spreadsheet the way I did, then you'd see that it's not the case. And then the one too many periods. So I even did that, as I say, when I put the spreadsheet down, and I thought, oh, hang on, something's not right here. And then I realized what I was doing wrong. So that's just something to worry about, that you would have done it for 21 years rather than 20. But have a play with my spreadsheet just to see where that comes from. And then, the higher order thinking, sort of sense checking in general. Always ask yourself, take a step back and say, does this number make sense? Does it make sense that the house price increases over time? Yes, because it's growing, right? It's not depreciating. Does it make sense that my investment is decreasing over time? Yes, because the difference between the mortgage and the rental is decreasing over time. So those sort of questions ask yourself. Does it make sense that the maintenance cost portion of the investment is increasing? Yes, because it's linked to the increasing house cost, as an example. And I suppose getting lost in the numbers and the wrong tone for a client. So just make sure. Also, the pamphlet, for example, don't do a tone that's for a client. I just want to flick back. If you look here where it says, thank you for your letter dated 1 January 2016 about the relative financial benefits of buying or renting a house. This is setting the scenario. You don't have to do this if you're writing to your friend. Whenever, I encourage you to go back to your emails where you write to a friend. When do you say thank you for your email dated 1 Jan, when you spoke about our friendship and how good that braai was, for example? You don't do that, right? So don't do that when the question's asking you to write to a friend. This is perfect for a client letter. It's not good for a friendly email. I just wanted to point that out. So don't go with a pre-planned version of an answer. A format, yes, but not the answer. Use the audience and the actual question to guide you. Okay, just finally, I know we're out of time.
Sorry, I just want to make one comment, if I may, Jared. Sorry about that, but we found when we actually marked these on a national scale, there were a number of candidates who spoke about the house being the value of the house as a home, and also it seemed that they were coming from a perspective of knowing what they would like to do. They would like to own a home. So what you need to do is you go back to those instructions. That is your world and who you are. You don't come in with a preconceived idea about what is best for you and then try and angle it for this particular customer or this client or this audience. Okay, so it's very important that you go back to those instructions. What do the instructions say? Forget about what you feel would be most appropriate for yourself. It's not about that. And so that then impacts on everything you're reading of all the instructions if you come with a preconceived idea about something. So you need to immerse yourself in your role in this instance, in every instance that they give you, and make sure that they align with the instructions. I just wanted to say that, sorry.
That's a great point, and I remember that. I remember that some of the students mentioning, the brick, and it's nice to walk through your house and have that feeling that you own this asset. And yes, that, practically speaking, that's absolutely true. If you own a house, that is definitely true. That's not what the client was talking about. They were talking about it from a purely financial point of view and what's the better investment. So yeah, as Billy said, it's a great point, and I had forgotten that the students a lot of them had
I
actually
have a
mentioned.
question. I know we're out of time, but I just want to ask this. So with this, the issue I had with this question was that I got so lost in the numbers that my mind zoned off the communication side. So when I had to go back to communicating, I was just like, wait, what was I supposed to say to this person? So like, what advice would you give for like cases like that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I do know, we often say to students that the numbers are just part of it. So if you get the wrong answer, it shouldn't mean that your whole world falls apart, because there's this whole other element. It's the communication aspect. But you have to know that we are marking your paper both from a technical point and from a communication point. And the numbers, this one was heavily geared towards you needed a lot of numbers to answer the question, but you could have still got a lot of marks elsewhere. It would have been a little bit more tricky to pass, but certainly you can't just focus on the numbers. That's not, you have to prepare enough and plan enough and practice enough your exams to know that there is the technical side is one element, and the calculations are one element of the technical side. As I say, you could have got the numbers wrong and still passed. You really can. You would have noted if you read the examiner's report, you'll see that they specifically mention that some students got the numbers slightly wrong. That's fine. Let's say you did it one extra period, which I saw some students do. As I said, I did it when I first put the spreadsheet together. That wouldn't have caused you to fail in and itself. But because you would have been slightly out, you still would have seen that actually the rental scenario was better under the one scenario, under the one house growth scenario, and the house investment was under the higher house cost was better. So you'd still come to that same conclusion. Where it becomes more tricky is how far out you are. And as you say, if you fall apart from a communication point, then that doesn't help either. So I guess my only advice to you is to practice and know that the calculations are one element. We like to, because we love numbers, we love calculating things, we like to jump head on into that and forget about the rest, and it doesn't help. Even if you get the calculation absolutely perfect, if you're not answering from a communication point of view, you're not going to pass either. So that doesn't help. So hopefully that helps.
So I also want to offer something there, Jared. What I find is you have to recalibrate. Jared keeps on speaking about that level head. So the best thing for you to do when you see that you're getting yourself into quite a tiz, you need to take time out and do some slow breathing. And the exhale of the breath will reduce the heart rate, and it actually reduces the adrenaline. This is absolutely important and very good to do. Then what you do is you ask yourself, what pattern has emerged from the figures that I do have? And then you will find that you'll be able to use words where you don't use the figures. And you just start with that. So you will speak about something being less, marginally less, quite a bit more, or whatever. And if you can keep all the components together and use that hedging language, then the last thing you would have to do would have been to put the actual amounts in brackets next to those words, and so the sense of it is retained, because there were people who actually were not even slightly wrong, but they got the reasoning right, and the figures they weren't jarring from a communicative point of view. I mean, we could see if the figures were jarring from a communicative point of view, but if they were on the right track and the figure looked reasonable for us, because we have a sense of reasonability anyway, then we passed them communicatively, and then it was up to the technical marker whether or not to give that technical mark. So so that's what I would do. Go and recalibrate, and please, it's something that you should do if you find yourself losing your level-headedness, is to go back to your real strength is your breathing, to just calm down by inhaling slowly, but most of all exhale slowly, because it de-triggers the adrenaline. Hope that helps.
That's a great point. I mean, you've got, but in your brain, like quite physically, you've got let's call it a channel, where your cognitive thinking happens, and when you stress, that starts constricting. And so you can think of it as, a hose pipe that you're really constricting the water flow. And if you can slow your breathing, as Billy says, relax a little bit, you'd open that up, and then you start to think more clear. So take a step back, and really the answer might be as simple as what you'd mentioned. One of the students in the session mentioned, if you just change the 200 on your 27-200, you got the right answer. And that might then pop out, reread your question. What am I missing? So I've just sort of put these final tips and hints. This is not specific to any questions. It's not to this exam. This is for all to sort of encompass your exam technique. But please reread what you write. Whether it's a paragraph or a slide, I want you to, when you write a paragraph, for example, in a letter or in an email, reread that paragraph I'm not talking about at the end, because often we're limited for time, but if you get into a habit of rereading what you wrote, it makes it so that first of all you pick up any grammatical errors or maybe spelling mistakes, but more importantly, you see, did I write what I wanted to write? Because it's very easy to plan to write something and then you go off a little bit on a tangent or a rabbit hole. You write about something else. And then when you reread it, you go, oh, hang on, I've missed the point. I haven't quite made my point, and you can change it. And did I say it in as little words as I meant to? So that's one key thing. And you can do it over a slide presentation as well. Look at your slide and say, ask yourself, so what? Always, always, always ask yourself, so what? What was my point here? And your point should always tie in with your instructions. Am I answering the instructions? So when you mentioned, for example, as Billy said, you walking through a house and you love, the feeling that of owning a home, ask yourself, so what? Was that actually answering the question? You can quite quickly say, no, actually it's not. It's not answering it from an investment point of view. It's a nice to have, but it's not key. Use the word slide count. I think we've mentioned that. I always go towards the max, but use it as a guideline to see, have I actually answered the instructions? Have I found all the instructions, and have I answered them in as short a way as possible? Please use spell check at the end. So spell check is available under Word as well as on PowerPoint. Just get used to using spell check because it'll quickly correct any spelling errors that you may have. We all mistype. You don't need to have a perfect grasp of the English language. The computer can help you there. I use spell check for this presentation as well, just to make sure. It would have been quite embarrassing if I put up a communication PowerPoint and I had spelling errors everywhere. You wouldn't have a lot of faith in me. So use spell check. Then make use of examples. I think I've said that, but especially when you have tables and graphs, give an example that brings that to life. Get into a habit of doing that, especially in a PowerPoint slide. You've got a lot more space to work with in PowerPoints. And just while I'm on that, err on the side of you can use the PowerPoint slide. Don't just put 3 bullet points down in a PowerPoint. Look at this PowerPoint that I've got in front of you. I've got quite a lot of sentences or bits of information, but I've said it in short enough ways to get a lot onto a slide. And in your exam, you're not presenting, so you can't talk to the point. So whatever you put down on the slide is the only thing we can mark you on. So you would err on a little bit too much information, not full sentences and everything, but use the slide that you've got there. And then to that point, I sort of say use the bottom of slides as wrapping up space. So you might have noticed in this presentation as well as that I would have at the bottom of a slide, I would sort of give a point. What this ties in with my so what when I ask what was my point. Well, if I don't feel like I've quite hit the nail on the head, or if my audience might not quite know what the slide was about, make your point in a bubble at the bottom of the slide. It's a very powerful way to sort of wrap up a slide, and it's also a good way to signpost to the next slide. You could say, well, what is the impact if we change X? And that then leads in nicely to the next slide. You may or may not be aware of a design element in PowerPoint. That can help you really just put slides together. This specific presentation that I've shown you today is a standard design in PowerPoint. So you don't have to make your slides all fancy. Please don't spend time trying to find pictures. But PowerPoint has made it very easy to make your slides at least interesting. But at the very least, you can actually zoom out. So go to what you call, it's a view in PowerPoint called Slide Sorter, and you can quickly zoom out and have a look and see what your slides look at from a bird's eye view, and make sure your slides look interesting enough. They don't all look the same. If they all look the same, I can tell you now your audience is falling asleep as you're going through each slide, because it all looks the same, and from a communication point, you'll get marked down. So it's not a technical element. But if there's nothing else that you took from this presentation, please find the instructions, right? You can only pass this exam if you find out what it is that you have to answer and answer those. Make your best effort of answering that. So that's all I had to say. other than, yeah, the hard work's, I like this sort of saying hard work puts you where the good luck can find you. So it's really up to you between now and then to come up with an exam plan and practice it and prepare for the exam, and good luck, everyone. And yeah, hopefully that was useful. I don't know if there's any questions. I know we are out of time.
Jared, that was absolutely awesome. Jared has asked if there are any more questions. I think you need to jump in there, as he's also mentioned that it's quite late. It's fine for me, but Jared also has things to do, I'm sure. But if you could raise your questions now. But Jared, thank you very, very much. I really want to just give you a round of applause. Anyone have any questions? Anything to add? Are you a little bit wiser? Hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you. I think this was a really great presentation. It was a really good session.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matule. Okay. Well, that's it. We have recorded this. Unfortunately, I recorded it only from Jared's fourth slide, but we did also go back to the slides. So I do think that there will be enough information there for you. And I've just got to. Vulenda also said it was very insightful, which is great. So we've recorded this, and I hope you don't mind that if your voice came up, it will also be recorded. I just need to know, needed you to know that it is being recorded, and we'll put it on the Academy YouTube channel. And Jared is going to send me the presentation slides, which I think are absolutely beautiful and very, very well put together, as well as the Excel spreadsheet, and I will send that to you. As soon as I've got that, I'll send it to you via the normal channels through Vula. Okay.
Yeah. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Jared, once again.
Pleasure. Bye,
okay, everybody. Have a good weekend. I'm certainly going to after that. It was great.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, same to you, Billy. Thanks.
Thank you.
Just
Thanks, Phoebe. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.